You can certainly ask me a 1 Corinthians question. If I don't know the answer, Debbie does.
It's actually more of a pity question, because you were not necessarily tongues have totally stopped, or did you mean to say like all the sign gifts have not stopped?
Excuse me.
Or,
I don't, there's,
all the gifts are still in some way.
I don't think you can, well, let me put it this way. I grew up in my formative years in the church were in ministries that were very clearly secessionist. And by secessionist, I mean they made it a point of doctrine that cessationist,
Yeah.
cessationist,
Split.
Leaving the union.
whatever,
Cessation.
cessationist.
What
So,
she says.
yeah.
The scary part is I knew what you meant.
Right. Well, and that is that the sign gifts had clearly ended.
Right.
Okay. That ended with the completion of the tongues, healings, that kind of thing, had stopped, done. Period. And that was just sort of there was really not a whole lot of discussion about it. And it wasn't until as I got older and it started going into actually looking at texts and going, I don't, you can't really biblically support that argument. Okay, so I don't think you can biblically prove that the sign gifts have stopped. Okay, there is a problem. There is a practical problem when you start talking about sign gifts, in that things like people being raised from the dead, you don't see that happening. You don't see I don't see visible hands being, crippled hands being fixed, or blind people, people born blind. In John chapter 9, a man born blind suddenly can see, kind of thing. I don't see that sort of thing happening. Yet I don't have an explanation as far as why not. I don't know. I mean, there are explanations out there. It has to do with the fact that, well, now we have the Holy Spirit indwelling us is one. Another one is just there's so much unbelief that the prince of the power of the air has just clouded our vision. I mean, there's different approaches. So I said all that to say this, whereas in the past I would have said, in a past life, if somebody said, oh, yeah, I went to a church and they spoke in tongues, I would have said, ooh, I'm okay, have fun, enjoy, come back and tell us the story, how it went for you. So, all right, well, let's get going here, because you're going to be visited by 3 ghosts tonight. I'm sorry. We're going to be visited. This would be the ghost of Christmas yet to come, I guess, would be the way to look at it. But so today is March 3rd. Welcome back. Today is March 3rd. It was on this date in 1794 that Richard Allen founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. And we have been to the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Mother Bethel, as it is called. And there's a statue of Richard Allen out front. The story is that, and he's buried in the basement of the church. If you watch the video version of this, I don't know if I've ever told you guys this, but if you watch the video version of this, there's a couple of advantages to watching the video. One, you can just fast forward through the boring parts, but actually it's a lot shorter, because I edit out, like last week's, when I got done editing it, was 45 minutes. I throw in pictures. Like when I say Richard Allen, there'll be a picture of Richard Allen. And I might even put in a picture of, me standing at Richard Allen's tomb, sort of thing. But the story is that Richard Allen was a bishop in the Methodist Church, or I don't know if he was a bishop. No, he wasn't a bishop at that point, I don't think. But he and another African American were in the Philadelphia Methodist Church. I forget the name of it. And were there to worship and were literally praying. They were like, there was like an altar where you could go up and pray, and they were praying, the two of them, and a white deacon in the church got up and tapped them on the shoulder and said, "You can't pray here. You can't do this here. This is where the whites preach." This was in 1790 Philadelphia, and his friend was still praying, and he said, "Well, just wait till he's done praying, and then we'll go to the blacks." And the white deacon said, "No, you got to go now. You can't be praying here." He's like, so they had this discussion about, let him finish praying, and then we'll go back to the. And no, you need to. And he was like pulling this guy, this white deacon was pulling him out of the prayer, and so. Richard Allen and his friend, and I forget his name. His name. He's another great. He was his partner. They became partners. So they took that experience and thought, well, if you're not going to let us pray in your church, we'll just build our own. And so Richard Allen and his partner bought a piece of land in Philadelphia and built a church there, and rebuilt it and built it again. And he ultimately was not consecrated, ordained as a bishop in the Methodist Church by Francis Asbury, who was the greatest Methodist. It's like ever. It's like, the greatest Arminian was not Arminius, it was John Wesley. And the greatest Methodist was not John Wesley, it was Francis Asbury. But Asbury ordained him, and he founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I'm told, again, this is to my detriment. I am not that familiar with that many black believers, black church members. But I'm told that, everyone knows Richard Allen in the black church in the U.S. So it behooves you to know who Richard Allen is. Everybody knows Richard Allen. Kind of like in the Baptist church, you all should know who, like, D.L. Moody is, or Charles Spurgeon. We all know D.L. Moody. We all know Billy Graham. They all know Richard Allen. But that was on this date in 1794. In 1840, today is the birthday of Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce Indians. I don't know if you remember, there was a movie, a book that came out, I Will Fight No More Forever. That was the Nez Perce Indians. Chief Joseph, one of the last great Indian holdouts, I guess, to another one of the great moments in white American history. And I use that. Speaking, I'm looking at my list. The first four things are all like really, none of my first four items here say anything good about the white male leadership of our country over the course of the years. So we have Richard Allen, and then we have Joseph, Chief Joseph. It was on this date in 1877 that Rutherford B. Hayes took the oath as president. He did it on a Saturday, Saturday, because the actual inauguration day was on a Sunday. And so he took it in private, and then the day after, they had the whole inauguration ceremony. Rutherford B. Hayes won the election he was awarded the victory after the election of 1876. Now, I'm just saying that because there's going to be a lot of talk coming into this 2024 election about corruption in the election process. And there was a lot of talk about corruption in the 2020 election process, and the one before that, and the one before that, and the one before that. The election of 1876, now that was a corrupt election. Okay, so it's like one of the fun things about U.S. history is, you get these people, it's like, oh, we've never had something like this before. It's like, oh, yes, we have. The election of 1876, well, it was decided by a committee. It was close. There was no winner in the Electoral College. And so Rutherford B. Hayes, being a Republican, agreed to, so that they said if he gets the election, if we give him the election, he agreed to move the federal troops out of the South, effectively ending Reconstruction. And of course, once Reconstruction ended, then Jim Crow set in. So again, another loosely defined great moment in American white male leadership history. And I say that as a white male. And here's the four. Why not? In for a penny, in for a pound. It was on this date in 1813 that the Women's Suffrage March took place in Washington, where several 100,000 women joined to march on Washington for women's suffrage. This is the one, and this is one of my favorite stories. Ida B. Wells, you're familiar with Ida B. Wells? She's the one who they renamed Congress Parkway for Ida B. Wells. She was from Chicago, a black woman who made her name writing against lynching. Incidentally, great book, Crossing the Lynching Tree. If you have not read that, highly recommend it. But be that as it may, she was, in terms of a black leader and against racism of the day and women's suffrage as well. And so she and her followers went to Washington to be in this walk. She got to the Women's March on Washington, her and her friends and supporters and things like that. And she was told that if Ida B. Wells was black and her supporters were black, that she was told that she couldn't march in the procession because if she did, the Southern women wouldn't march. And so there was she's like, so finally she said, okay, fine, I understand, I won't march. And so she and her group went and stood at a point in the line near the beginning, not like at the end, but near the beginning, so that it continually got going. And then when the Illinois delegation walked by, she and her partners just walked into the middle and said, "I'm here, I'm walking," and that was it. So she is just, I mean, like this. Yeah, so I'm like.
What year was that?
1913. 1913. So yeah, that's my Ida B. Wells. There was a PBS or American Stories, or I forget what it was, about her. It was fairly interesting. So that's it. Okay, that's it for the the problems of white male leadership. In 1933, it was on this date that the Navigators were formed. Anybody heard of the Navigators? It's one of those parachurch organizations. They've done literature and programs and things like that. And then finally, the only other thing I have today, it was on this date in 1987 that David Daniel Kaminsky died. He was 76 years old, died of a heart attack. You're supposed to go, pardon me? Daniel David Kaminsky. Okay, so yeah, that was a very long name, so he shortened it, eliminated the Kaminsky, changed it with a K, eliminated the David, and called himself Danny Kaye. Danny Kaye died on this date in 1987. We just watched, what did we watch with him? White Christmas. White Christmas with him. He and Bing Crosby? No. Who's? Bing Crosby is on White Christmas. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, he did quite a few. The Inspector General is considered one of his big, great films. Very funny actor. Died on this date in 1987. Again, being the speaking of all of the preparation, thanks to Jared for his kind words, and all his preparation included carefully filling out the sheet here with the answers, and then leaving it on my desk at home. So if I look, we went to a concert last night. Debbie and I did. We saw John Gorka in concert. John Gorka, greatest folk singer of all time. If you don't know that, you should. But we went to see John Gorka in concert. This is like the 10th time we have seen him. 10th or 12th, I don't know. It's so many times. But he's an extremely funny guy for a number of reasons. And one of them is he's got all these songs, and he'll readily say that, I don't remember the words to that song that he wrote. And he was singing a song last night, and as he was singing the song, it was clear that he had forgotten the words to his own song. Okay, and he's like, there's this moment where he's just trying to remember without, but it's a forgiving group. We're all kind of cheering him on. Go, John, go! You can remember it. So if I'm doing that, it's just trying to remember what it was I said here because I don't have the sheet. All right, we are in 2 Corinthians. okay, which is not, so by virtue of a quick review, Paul's second letter to the church of Corinth. In fact, it's probably his fourth. It's at least his fourth letter to the church of Corinth. Now, I will grant you, 2 Corinthians doesn't have the pizzazz that 1 Corinthians does. You know, it doesn't have the number of fun topics that it does. In fact, 2 Corinthians is sort of like, you know, it's this long defense of Paul's ministry. Okay, Paul's apostolic authority. If you remember, one of the issues that was happening between the church of Corinth and Paul was they were questioning his apostleship. You know, like, and we talked last week about the true Scotsman's fallacy, that no apostle would do this, or then Paul says, well, I did it. No true apostle would do that. Okay, that's the no true Scotsman fallacy. And so he's talking, last week his letter was in response to some complaints that he hadn't come and visited. And we talked about, in the end, Paul writes 4 letters and visits Corinth 3 times. We know of. Okay, there could have been more than 4. There could have been 14. Okay, but we know of 4 letters that Paul writes, and we know of 3 visits that he makes. Okay, and 2 Corinthians comes. We figure, again, this is an assumption, so we figure that this is Paul's 4th letter after his 2nd visit. Okay, he's contemplating his 3rd visit to Corinth. Okay, and this will become clear as we go through the text going on. So again, I said that originally Paul wanted to visit the Corinthians 2 more times. Okay, let's see where. Let's start. So I'm in chapter 1, beginning with verse 23. He says, I call God as my witness, and I'm sorry, let me go back. He changes his mind in verse 23 in order to spare the church. Okay, I call God as my witness, and I stake my life that it was in order to spare you that I did not return to Corinth. Okay, because Paul's 2nd visit had been a not happy time. Okay, Paul had come in and he's dealing with some individuals at the church who are causing some grief at him. They're either, again, if you remember in 1 Corinthians, there are these divisions. Some follow Paul, some follow Apollos, some follow Peter, some follow Jesus. Okay, and he's like, so there's these clear divisions, and it appears, and we'll get to that today, that there's there's a particular group, and maybe even just one person who is specifically making grief for Paul in the church of Corinth. And Paul had to apparently come back, and it was not a fun time. Okay, it was sort of like getting called out to the woodshed, so to speak. Okay, I know we don't use woodsheds anymore. That's what's wrong with these kids. I'm going to edit that part out. No. So Paul had to come in, and I don't think that this is something Paul relished. Okay, and you kind of go through 2 Corinthians, you get this picture of Paul, and I don't think, they talk about, in later on in 2 Corinthians we'll read where, you complain that in my letters I'm strict, but in person I'm not, kind of thing. That I don't think Paul was somebody who really enjoyed the one-on-one confrontation. I just kind of get that idea. This is an assumption on my part. So it was tough for him. It was tough for the people. Okay? So rather than come through again, he just writes this letter. Okay? So I'm going to kind of fill you in on some of the details. So he writes this letter, and this letter kind of lays it on the line. Guys, you need to straighten up in this way. Whatever it is, we don't have that letter. Whatever it is, he writes this letter, and he says, you guys need to straighten up. And he doesn't know, he doesn't have the instant response. He doesn't have the read response. No, does anybody ever use that on your email where you tick the read response? I found out that like if you just kind of read it in the viewing pane, it doesn't show as reading it. I found that out when I worked for Ford because my boss sent me an email with a read response on it. And I read it and then he called me up and said, why didn't you read this? I was like, what do you mean I did? No, you didn't. I did. I did this, and, well, it didn't show. I'm like, that's when I realized, oh, okay, you got to, now I just delete it. If you send me an email with a read response, delete. you don't trust me to read it, forget about it. This is email. You all remember email? We used to use email a lot, okay? But he wanted to, but to find out, and I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, but to find out what happened, he sends Titus to Corinth to find out. Okay? As in, Timothy, Titus, that Titus. So he sends Titus to Corinth to find out. Go find out, and let me know. Come back, we'll meet up, we'll find out. Okay? So this is kind of the mind of Paul at this moment. He sent this letter. He doesn't know what's happened. He knows that people are upset. He's waiting for Titus. What's happened with him. Okay? So what does he want to spare them from? He wants to spare them from another painful visit. Okay? Verse 1 of chapter 2. So I made up my mind that I would not make another painful visit to you. Okay, so again, another painful. So there's a previous visit. And whatever about that visit, it was painful. Okay, again, I don't think, you could make the argument that he's talking about his first time in Corinth. I don't think it's a very good one. I mean, because, he was there for 18 months. I mean, there was some issue. There were some troubles with it. But I don't think I would call it a painful visit. So there's this second visit. He doesn't want to do that again. For if I grieve you, who is left to make me glad but you whom I have grieved? I wrote as I did, so that when I came, I would not be distressed by those who should have made me rejoice. I had confidence in all of you that you would all share my joy, for I wrote you out of great distress and anguish of heart and with many tears, not to grieve you, but to let you know the depth of my love for you. Okay, what did he want to spare them from? Another painful visit. Okay, so verses 3 and 4 explain that he wrote to the church rather than visit it. And that letter, that one that he's referring to, was written to show the depth of Paul's love for the church. Okay, it's one of these kind of things where, and maybe you've had a conversation with a loved one where you just truly feel that listen, I'm telling you this, most people wouldn't care about this particular habit you have. But I care, and that's why I'm telling you, you need to stop this, or you need to start this, or this is going to work, or that's going to work, or something like that. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of Paul is in that category. He sees this church as his child. He went in there, he started the church grew under him. He kind of sees this as one of his children, and his children are not doing the way he thinks they should be. Okay, and those of you who have had kids, you have had at one point or another, you have had that discussion, right? How many had fun with that, right? Yeah, let's do that again.
Yeah. Still having fun.
Still having fun with those discussions. Yeah. It's just like, I don't, listen, oh, you just hate me. You just don't want me to have any fun, kind of thing, right? Yes, that's exactly right. That's why I'm having this no, right? And Paul is in that his children are not doing what he wants them to do, what he thinks is the right thing to do. Do we have that letter? No, we don't. Yes, no, maybe. I say no. Okay, some could argue that, because again, for some, and we were talking about this earlier as far as like the sign gifts, there are some who are like dead set. There are 27 letters. You don't want to admit that Paul might have written other letters, because it's like, what if they're found? Well, that would be kind of interesting. It really would be, I'm surprised that nobody, and maybe they have, I'm surprised that nobody has ever tried to fake another letter from Paul, convincingly. I mean, there's a lot of what's pseudepigrapha. Pseudepigrapha, those are writings that purport to be by someone that may or may not be by someone. So technically, all four of the Gospels are pseudepigrapha. Okay? Because the Gospels themselves, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, never self-identify the writer. Never says, I, Matthew, am writing this gospel. His name is ascribed to it. Now, there's reason to believe that, but there's all kinds of things that came in the Gospel of Thomas, there's the Gospel of Peter, there's the Gospel of Judas, there's all kinds of other writings that come up in the 2nd and 3rd century where people try to. But recently, nobody has tried to do that, because there was in the early 19th century, there was a story about a person who claimed to have found another Shakespeare play and got really far, got it performed and everything for a good 5 or 10 years before they were finally caught and proven that it was not, in fact, another Shakespeare play. But regardless, so we don't have that letter, okay? And then in verse 5, we get into the problem that he sees. He says, and I'm going to just read the whole through verse 11, and we're going to kind of talk about it. So, if anyone has caused grief, he has not so much grieved me as he has grieved all of you to some extent, not to put it too severely. The punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient. Now, instead, you ought to forgive and comfort him, so that he will not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. I urge you, therefore, to reaffirm your love for him. Another reason I wrote to you, well, let me stop right there for a minute. Okay, so Paul's point here echoes what we read about in 1 Corinthians 12, that if one part suffers, they all suffer. Okay, remember if the eye hurts and whatever, that whole the body parts thing. So Paul is like, listen, if somebody has grieved me, it's not just me, he's grieved all of us. Okay, now the implication is that Paul knows who this person is. That he's talking about a specific person. Okay? He doesn't want to just say, listen, guys, be nice to Marty. Okay? He wants everybody to, he's kind of leaving it neutral. There's a guy, which like today it would really narrow down. There's a guy in your class. Okay, wait, there's, okay. We've cut the number down to precipitously. The NLT, the New Living Translation, translates this, and this is just, it's a kind of a different way. It says, I am not overstating it when I say that the man who caused all the trouble hurt all of you more than he hurt me. Okay, the different, he thinks he's causing trouble for me, he's causing trouble for all of you. That's kind of the implication here. Okay, again, that's, I'm making an assumption here. It could be that he doesn't know who's causing the trouble, okay? But the specificity that comes with the rest, okay, not to put it, the punishment inflicted on him by the majority is sufficient. You've done enough, okay? Maybe they've shunned him. Maybe they've blocked him from fellowship with them. I don't know what, He said, instead, you ought to forgive and comfort him so that he will not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow, okay? Reaffirm your love for him. Okay. Another reason I wrote you was to see if you would stand the test and be obedient in everything. So again, this is part of this letter. He says, I show you my love for you, to get this guy back into fellowship. And are you going to obey? Are you going to do what you need to do? Okay? Anyone you forgive, I also forgive. And what I have forgiven, if there was anything to forgive, I have forgiven in the sight of Christ for your sake, in order that Satan might not outwit us, for we are not unaware of his schemes. Okay? So Paul's severe letter, which is what it's sometimes referred to, also included instructions. Did the Corinthians obey? Did the Corinthians obey? Well, at this point, we don't know. Okay? So at this point, we don't know. But ultimately, we'll find out that, yes, they did. Okay? But at this point, we don't know in the book. Okay? And Paul's discussion of forgiveness here, forgiveness verses 10 and 11, reiterates the point that some divisions and disagreement in the assembly are satanic. Okay? So again, he's looking at this thing and saying, listen, guys, you got to realize there's more at stake here than just whatever your particular little thing is. There's the, I don't know, it's I think it's an urban myth that a church is split over the color of the carpet, that, that's personally my opinion. But I do know of a church that split over what direction the new building was going to face. That they were going to build a new chapel, and one group wanted it to face north and south, and another group wanted it to face east and west. And that church had a split that was southwest. The Oak Forest Baptist Church, that split over that. But that, whatever you think it's going to be, blue carpet or red carpet or something like that. Now, it's always more to it than simply whether there's blue carpet or red carpet. But that always comes up. Every time you have a business meeting and you're voting on something significant, somebody always brings up that, church is split over the color of the carpet. Okay, God, what church? I just want to know what church split over the color of the carpet. And if they did, it's more than simply, I like that shade better than that shade. Maybe this guy's brother-in-law, somebody in the church's brother-in-law sells this carpet and somebody else's nephew sells that carpet. Or it could be this costs this much, or this is available this soon. There's more to it than simply, if there was. Sorry, I'm going to edit this part out. This is Stan just going on a rant. But still, some of these are satanic. And at this point in church history, excuse me, if Satan ever was saying, listen, I got to nip this in the bud, this would be the time to do it. Okay, let's just stop this whole church thing. We don't want this to continue. We need to cut this off. Okay? So it's, again, and Paul is saying, for we are not unaware of his schemes. Okay, Paul even at this point is aware that, hey, there's an opposition. And again, Paul is going to write in one of his later things about, the prince of the power of the air. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, against principalities and powers, rulers of the darkness of this age, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, here he's kind of referring to that. It's like, guys, you got to realize that there's more to it than simply, two people disagreeing kind of thing. Okay. So we are not one. So So again, Paul is saying, listen, we need to get together. We need to agree. If you've forgiven him, I've forgiven him. If I've forgiven him, you should forgive him. I'm not, again. So maybe, and again, it's just speculating here. So maybe there's a guy that caused Paul some grief, and Paul knows who it is. And Paul is like, listen, guys, okay, I know who it is. I've forgiven him. You should forgive him. You should forgive him. If you forgive him, I'll forgive him. Okay, there's bigger things than simply whether you're going to follow Paul or Apollos or this or that. Okay. Now, in verse 12, we see that Paul actually, when I went to Troas to preach the gospel of Christ and found that the Lord had opened a door for me, I'm going to pause there. That's not a complete sentence, but I'm going to pause there for a minute. It's interesting. So Paul goes to Troas. Troas is the town where he had been there twice in Acts, and one time he was there. That's where he got the vision to go to go into Europe, essentially. That happened at Troas. So Paul, this is a town that he had been to before, okay? And he's there looking for Titus, okay? I still had no peace of mind because I did not find my brother Titus. So Paul goes to Troas looking for Titus. Why is he looking for Titus? Titus is the one that was sent to Corinth to find out, to deliver the letter perhaps, to follow through with whatever, to see, okay, have they stopped doing that? Have they forgiven that brother? Are they unified in that sense? He still doesn't know. But when he gets to Troas, what's interesting is he sees a great opportunity there in Troas. Okay? But the Lord had opened a door for me there. Okay? So he walks into Troas, he goes, wow, there's a great opportunity. I'm here for Titus, but hey, I can do this. But what does Paul do? He says, so I said goodbye to them because I did not find, so I said goodbye to them and went on to Macedonia. Because he was like, listen, I'm passing up opportunities here trying to find out about you guys. This is how important you are to me. I'm giving up whatever these opportunities are, whatever it was. I'm not walking through that door. So this is kind of an interesting thing. It's like, oh, well, God opens doors. We have to go through God's open doors. Well, Paul doesn't. So it's like, well, wait a minute. Of course Paul does. No, he doesn't. Right there. Paul had opened a door, so I said goodbye and moved on. Okay? Just throwing that out there, kind of thing. So we will, okay, so Paul goes to Troas to look for Titus, but does not find him. We'll find out later in chapter 12 that Paul had sent Titus to Corinth. Chapter 12 is where we find that out. And Paul actually gives up the opportunity in Troas to go search for Titus. Okay? So there's an open door there. Paul sees it. Paul recognizes it. But he's like, listen, I need to find Titus. I need to find out what's going on in Corinth. Okay? To me, this is just one of those interesting things about the Apostle Paul that we don't talk about a lot. You know, I mean, we don't talk a lot about the fact that Paul and Barnabas split up. You know, we're still talking about the Beatles splitting up, but we don't talk about whether, you know, the split up between Paul and Barnabas. You know, here, Paul, there's an open door, and Paul's like, I'm looking for Titus. I got it, you know, kind of thing. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting thought. You know, you can't really look at that and go, well, you know, maybe it wasn't really an open door. Well, Paul says it was. Paul says the Lord opened the door. Paul doesn't go through it. But verse 14, so he's talking about he's in this mental state where it's like, I've got to find out what's going on with my children. And again, maybe that's it. It's like, you know, when things are not right with your kids, or something is not right, you know, you're unsettled, right? I mean, it's like if your kid is having a hard time, you're having a hard time, right? I mean, that's pretty much what being a parent is. Suffering along with your kid or enjoying along with your kid, right? And Paul is like, they're suffering for some reason. There's an issue over there, and I'm trying to fix it, and I can't do anything else until that. And again, I mean, you know, some of us have had situations where something has happened with our kids that we just cannot, they're just not getting it. They're not understanding, you know, whatever. And you know, it gets worse as they get older, as I'm sure we all know. It's like there comes a point where not only do they, I mean, they never listen to you, right? I mean, they never listen to you. But there's a period of time when they're supposed to, right? You know, like this age. But there comes a point in time where not only do they not listen to you, they really don't have to. You know, it's really bad when your sons are like, you know, have full-time jobs and are not living at home anymore. Then it's really hard to boss them around. I'm just saying, right? Am I right?
Yeah.
You know, it's like, listen, you know, you can't do that. Dad, I don't know about, you know. Why can't kids be as obedient a child as I am? I'm going to edit this part out because my mom might be watching this kind of thing. In fact, right now, even now, she's probably sitting in church right now with that you know, the mom sense. Who, my son just said something stupid, kind of thing. So, but Paul is upset about this. I'm just trying to, you know, kind of, he can't really focus because this church that he started is causing this grief. But he stops all of that to just kind of, you know what, let's just praise God for a minute. Just in the middle of this stress, he said, you know what, I'm going to just praise God for a minute. Which is kind of an odd thing to do, but he does. He wants to keep the focus isn't really on Paul. The focus is on God and what God has done and what our role is. He says, but thanks be to God in verse 14, who always leads us as captives in Christ's triumphal procession and uses us to spread the aroma of the knowledge of him everywhere. Okay, now a brief excursus here. Just like that word, excursus. It's one of my new favorite words. I try and figure out every way I can use to use the word excursus. You know, on Roman triumphal processions. Okay, now Corinth is a Roman city. It's probably, we talked about this last week, I think, or maybe originally, that at one point it was like the third most important city in Rome. So they would have been very familiar with these kind of things. So these triumphal processions are, like victories on the battlefield, are usually preceded, they're made known, they're announced by a good news announcement. And what's the word they used? Gospel. So the excuse me, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, John use of the word gospel in Rome were these victory announcements. Oh, so-and-so has a gospel. There's a gospel over there. And somebody would stand up and say, Flavius Maximus won a tremendous victory. That was the first use. So when Jesus comes in and says, preaches the gospel, the good news, the Romans would have heard, oh, a victory announcement. There's a great news, something to announce that's good to hear. Okay. So basically, they're like a government-approved parade. Okay, like whenever your team wins the national championship, or whether the baseball team wins the World Series, or a football team wins the. What do football teams do? What do they play? What is that game again? The Super Bowl? I forget what it's called. Not a football fan here, If I've interviewed with a church once, what is your weakness? What is one of your weaknesses? It's like, I don't like football. It's hard to be a male pastor type in the church today and not like football, because I could care less. Right? This year it was what's her name's boyfriend's team against another team. Okay, but be that as it may, so there's the parade, right? Or there's a rally in Grant Park where the team comes out and ticker tape, and they've been doing this for decades. In the 50s, they would ticker tape parade. Every year when the Yankees won, they would go down, Main Street or whatever the Main Street in New York is, and a ticker tape parade kind of thing. Okay, and there was a certain form to them. Okay, they were led by the victorious general. Whoever had won the victory, he would clearly be the leader of it. Okay. And maybe he would be in a chariot or something, waving, kind of waving with the elbow so that your arm doesn't, I don't know, kind of the however they do that, the jazzy hands, something, But they would be led by the victorious general. It usually included something for a sacrifice. Okay, and that is because the procession they would be milling outside. Then the procession was from the outside into the temple to give sacrifice in thanks to the gods for bringing the victory, kind of thing, all right? And it always included prisoners, okay, or captives. There's a Shakespeare play, Titus Andronicus, where it kind of starts with this whole idea. If you've never seen Titus Andronicus, it's one of the very rarely produced ones. That's a jump on that opportunity. If you have a chance to see, has anybody seen Titus? There was a movie version. Yeah, Debbie and I have seen it a couple times.
Is that where the guy hangs upside down?
There's a pretty high body count in Titus Andronicus. It does not get produced a lot. Like very rarely do you see Titus. Although there was a movie version made, and don't. Don't watch it if you have a sensitive stomach. I'm just saying, but it starts with this whole, and actually a couple of them have this. I've seen Midsummer Night's Dream starts with a victory parade kind of thing. Okay, but the prisoners would be there, and sometimes the prisoners were going to be sacrificed, but the prisoners would be walking along, in handcuffs or whatever, or rope, and being led behind, maybe. Something along that line. And so this was a normal thing. Just like, again, when our teams win the World Series or whatever, the next thing everybody wants to know is, when's the parade? Okay, when's the parade? When's the celebration going to be? They know, there's the gospel, there's going to be a parade at some point. It's going to come back in, and there's going to be this big celebration. And Paul says, we are all in this celebration, that there is a victory, a triumphal procession going on, and we are part of that. Okay? But we are just the captives. Okay? He leads us as captives. We have been won by Christ in this battle. Okay? And our purpose, our use, is to spread the aroma of the knowledge of him everywhere. Okay? So Paul here in verses 4 through 16 sees his role as being part of a much larger process, or a much larger procession. Okay? Paul sees his and the church's, and the Corinthians, role as being an aroma, which I think is an interesting metaphor that he's using here. That Christians should be an aroma. That we're an aroma, and I know that instant, like, I don't know if I want people smelling me, or not that guy. Don't have that guy. Whatever kind of thing. But it's like, if you think of how aroma works, it's like it's kind of, you walk into a room, or you walk into certain places, and just from the smell you know where you are. Okay, it's like Debbie and I have been known on occasion to go to Goodwill stores. Anybody go to a Goodwill store? Okay, so this is great fun for us to go to a Goodwill store. And if you've ever been to a Goodwill store, they have a smell, right? Am I right? You know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't know, gallons of Febreze or whatever it is. Industrial size Febreze. But you walk in the door of a Febreze, you can just close your eyes. I'm in a Goodwill, right? Okay. So the other day we had gone somewhere. Actually, we went to a coffee shop in Mokina, and then we went to a Goodwill store. Not for long, just it was there. I said, hey, we're here. It's there. Let's go. And so we went, and then later we got back in the car, and we went somewhere else. And I forget. And I remember when I went to get the door for Debbie, we opened up, and I'm still smelling this Febreze. I'm like doing, is it me? It's like, did the air get into our car or something like that? It's like, she had bought like a pair of pants, gardening pants, and maybe it was like the Febreze was so strong on that one that it was just. But this aroma. Okay, it's like we have fires on the deck a lot, or fire in the and when you have a fire on the deck, it's as fun as it is, and you come back, we've been near a campfire. When I was a kid going to a Boy Scout camp, because all we did when I was in the Boy Scouts was start fires. That's a whole nother story. My mom said that when we would come home from a camp out, because my dad would go and I would go and my brother would go sometimes, and she would be like, no, you guys just leave your clothes out there. Just, get in, take the clothes off, go out there, because it all smelled like smoke. This aroma, kind of an aroma that we should be, that when you're in a room, the room should know you're there without you having to say, hey, by the way, I'm here. They should be able to smell the Febreze and go, hey, Stan's around here somewhere.
Well, it wasn't as pleasant as that. When I was in high school, I worked at a Brown's Chicken, and my mom always said, I know when Linda got home from work.
So it's just sort of like what is our role in, and there's other pictures in the Bible. This isn't the only one, but it's just sort of a, that the church should have an aroma in the neighborhood. The church, we should have an aroma, that our presence should be aware without having to announce it, without having to make a point, without having to have a procession, or without having to be obnoxious about it. Although sometimes your smell could be obnoxious, yeah.
Fragrance represents the origin. So when you smell something, you know where it comes from.
Yeah.
It represents the origin.
What is that smell kind of thing? What is that? It should be a pleasant aroma, and that's the implication. If you smell something nice, you want to know. Like Karen said, where did that come from? So again, that's kind of our, we work on trying to be this picture of argumentative, or we can fight our way, or stand up for this kind of stuff. And here Paul is saying we're to be used as an aroma. People should sense us, and like I said, where is that? Where did that come from? Where kind of thing. Okay, I'll get off of this. But he says, but thanks be to God who always leads us as captives in Christ's triumphal procession and uses us to spread the aroma of the knowledge of him and everywhere. For we are to God the pleasing aroma of Christ. So to God we are one of Christ. Just sort of like, how does God see us? God should see Christ in us, through us. When we see our effect, what's the source? The source is Christ. But to those who are among those who are being saved and those who are perishing, to the one we are an aroma that brings death. So again, the aroma isn't going to be pleasant to somebody who is perishing, to somebody who is not a believer. So to the saved, we are or should be an aroma of life. To the perishing, that is the lost, we are or should be an aroma of death. Not a pleasant thought, but, I'm sorry, did you? Oh, okay. And then Paul asks the question at the end of verse 16, to the one who we are an aroma that brings death, to the others an aroma that brings life. And who is equal to such a task? Okay, who is equal to such a task? Now the word there, equal, could be translated sufficient. It's actually the same Greek word that the Septuagint uses when in Exodus when God calls Moses, and Moses says, "I'm not sufficient to the task." When the Septuagint translated that Hebrew word, they used the Greek word here that Paul uses, equal. Right, you understand how the Septuagint works. So the Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Aramaic Old Bible. And so one of the ways we know we can compare a word in the New Testament, how it's used with how we find that same Greek word in the Septuagint, and then what the Septuagint, just like I did, say, okay, well, what did it mean in the Old Testament? We kind of get an idea of how the language, that's the Septuagint. I just saw that because Christian, you all remember Christian, right? Back when the church had a Christian in it. Now we don't have a Christian in our church. But he and I are friends on Goodreads. Anybody on Goodreads? Okay, so he's on Goodreads. He was reading a book called The Septuagint and Why It Matters. So now I feel obligated to explain why the Septuagint matters. So you don't have to read the book. I just explained it to you in a minute and a half, kind of thing. And so the question is, what is the answer to that question? Who is sufficient for that? Okay, so there's a couple of different ways you could look at this. Okay, you could look at this and say, well, no one is. So it's that, and who is equal or sufficient to that task? You could say no one. No one is. None of us can do this. Okay, which, depending on how you look at it, you could say, okay, but here Paul does say that this is what we're supposed to do, and would we be given a task that we're not able to do? I think another way to look at it is Paul is getting back to the defense of his apostolic thing. He's saying, he is, Paul. He says, I can do this. I'm doing this. When I show up in town, everybody knows it. There's that aroma. There's that, whoa, something's changed. There's a disturbance in the forest. Paul must be in town, kind of thing. Or maybe he's asking the Corinthians, okay, are you guys sufficient to this task? And of course, the final question is, what about us? Are we sufficient to this task? Are we leaving an aroma that makes people think positively, ooh, where does that come from? All the time during COVID, every morning, I would take my own COVID test. And my own COVID test is that, I have a coffee maker in the hallway. In the hallway. Yeah, coffee makers all through the house in various different rooms. Now, in the kitchen, I would have a coffee maker, and it would be set to a timer. And it would always, if I'm going to get up at 6, the coffee maker would be set to like 5:50. So I'd wake up. So I'd get up, I'd walk out the door, I'd open the door, and if I smelled the coffee in the hallway, okay, another day without COVID. That was my COVID test. Kind of. Pardon me?
Your sense of smell was intact.
Yeah, so it's like that was my COVID test. Okay, I still have never tested positive for COVID. Just saying. I probably had it a dozen times, but I've never tested positive for COVID. Except for every morning I took my own COVID test there. But unlike so many, we do, I'm sorry, and who is equal to the task? I'm going to hold off. We're going to get into verse 17 starting next week, because it's just, unlike so many, we do not peddle the word of God for profit. Ooh. That's an interesting phrase that Paul uses there. And I'm going to just tease you with that for next week. We're going to come back and talk about people who peddle the word of God for profit. That should be like a sermon title, right? Peddling God's word for profit or something like that. All right. Any questions? All right. Thank you all for coming, and look forward to seeing you next week.